Hi, I'm Nick Palmisano.
And I'm Matt Finney.
And this is the Bad News Network. With so much bad stuff happening all the time, it's nice to finally open with some good news. President Trump got two nice wins for America and the world over the past 2 weeks. First, the president brokered a deal between Kosovo and Serbia that has earned him his second Nobel Peace Prize nomination. This agreement resolves to build a railroad between Belgrade and Pristina, their two respective capitals. They've also decided to do a joint feasibility study of linking railway to the Adriatic Sea. They've developed a plan to open their border and also recognize the degrees and certifications of the other country. And perhaps most importantly, they've decided to return and try to help recognize the remains of the many bodies that each country is holding from their bloody conflict in 1999. As an act of good faith with the United States, both countries have come out in support of religious freedom. Both countries have also moved to decriminalize homosexuality across the globe, and Serbia has moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This deal was of particular importance to me as I'm old enough to have been part of one of the first missions into Kosovo as part of KFOR. As a guy who grew up in Europe and had spent a little bit of time in Greece, it was shocking to see that level of violence on the European continent. The cruelty by people that in our eyes were essentially the same over a dispute that occurred a century earlier was truly horrifying. Candidly, for me, it's acted as a personal reminder about how dangerous it is to trumpet the idea of a civil war in our own country anytime we're slightly aggravated with what the other side is saying. I met a lot of orphans in Kosovo, and I met a lot more people whose lives would never be as good as they were before the war. And I saw the result of a lot of cruelty, and it's something that I never would have expected to see in Europe. I'm thrilled to see that this conflict is finally taking major steps towards resolution. Second, the president succeeded in getting the UAE and Bahrain to normalize relations with Israel, making them only the third and fourth Arab nations to do so since 1948. Contrary to the verbal attacks about the deals by the Democrats, this is extremely significant. While many of the details of this accord still remain elusive, there will be embassies in place and travel restrictions removed, which is a huge step in the right direction. The president has hinted that 5 more Arab nations are in negotiations to follow suit. The world is waiting to see if that occurs. Many believe that the movement from these nations largely stems from their desire to separate and disengage from Iran. President Trump's more aggressive policy towards Iran has made many people believe that there would actually be repercussions if Iran attempted to destabilize the region. President Trump's more aggressive policy towards Iran has brewed some confidence that if Iran were to attempt to destabilize the region, there would be repercussions. The only detractors of the deal at this time are the Palestinians, who see this deal as them losing ground against Israel and a reduction in their chances of getting the outcome they desire. For their part, Israel agreed to stop any additional annexes of Palestinian territory for the foreseeable future. If the president's belief is accurate and more countries are willing to find common ground in the Middle East, he may be responsible for cooling the biggest hotbed of violence over the past 50 years. While I completely recognize that that's a huge if, let's count these as 2 big W's. Here's to a little more peace in the Middle East.
Sean Lookout, an Alaskan dentist, was filmed performing dentistry on a hoverboard and was arrested and put in jail for 12 years and will not be able to practice dentistry for another 10 years after he gets out. What? He exclaimed after doing dentistry on a hoverboard? To which the judge responded, well, it's also the fraud, the application of anesthesia on non-consenting patients, which you're not trained in, and embezzling money from your employers. As police slapped the handcuffs on Lookout and broke his hoverboard in half, he was heard exclaiming, "Is this even America anymore?"
This past Sunday, 2 police officers were shot in an ambush. The victims were a 31-year-old female officer that was shot in the arm and jaw, and a 24-year-old male officer that was shot in the forehead and hands. Admirably, the 2 police officers managed to find cover, and the female officer applied a tourniquet to the male officer so that he wouldn't bleed out. As they did this, many onlookers heckled them and made fun of them, saying that they were aired out. Both were moved to a nearby hospital that were then blockaded by protesters screaming, "We hope they die." The sheriff's department literally tweeted out, to the protesters blocking the entrance and exit of the hospital emergency room, yelling, "We hope they die," referring to two LA sheriffs ambushed today in Compton. Do not block emergency entries and exits to the hospital. That's right, the world's problems are now solved via Twitter warfare. Either way, two people were arrested outside of the hospital. This included a reporter who did not identify herself as such, who attempted to rush the building. Both presidential candidates had a response. President Trump essentially threatened those involved and called them animals. Vice President Biden called for a total ban on assault weapons, even though assault weapons had nothing to do with this crime, and even if they were all banned, it wouldn't have affected this in any way, shape, or form. I am now about to editorialize. I'm not sure how we got to a point where anyone thinks it's moral to laugh at two potentially dying police officers and/or to block a hospital emergency room and chant that you want someone to die. But I have to tell you, when I was watching that, I'd be totally good with an ambulance using anyone involved in any of that as a speed bump as it attempted to get to the hospital. That is a psychotic lack of empathy, and if you think any of that is okay, I'm cool with you not existing.
The Vice President and Democratic Party are picking a pretty bad time to make diminishing gun rights a part of their platform. Americans have bought a record-breaking 6 million guns between the months of March and July this year. Americans of all political parties have armed themselves as rioters, have formed a Voltron-esque merging with politicians and media as they continue to stoke fear across the country. The demand for 9mm ammo, for example, is so high right now that the average cost per round is between 60 and 70 cents. Nick and I have been going to the range and just throwing our guns at targets for budgeting purposes. Or we would be if we didn't lose all our guns in that tragic canoe accident.
Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny put out on the Instagram that he is recovering very well. If you forgot, they tried to kill him last week for the second time. They use old Soviet nerve agent, the greatest nerve agent in all the world. Navalny intends to return to Mother Russia, where he will take on Putin and likely die. Again. Navalny says he has not been able to move around very much, but he is feeling much better since recovering from his coma. The Kremlin, for their part, have denied any involvement in the one man who has given them the most problem by exposing their corruption, attempted killing. The Kremlin has publicly asked the French and Germans to turn over the lab results to prove their innocence. Dmitry Peskov says it's not even weird that there was nerve agent in his tea. He drinks tea with nerve agent all the time. Peskov say he might even have some tea after press conference, cause all this talk of nerve agent make him thirsty. Then he called Navalny a lightweight who can't hold his nerve agent tea. Большое спасибо. До свидания.
The South Dakota Attorney General Jason Ravensborg claimed to have hit a deer Saturday evening on his way home from a Republican event. He did not, in fact, hit a deer. He, in fact, hit a man. I can understand the confusion as we humans share a lot of traits with deer, such as antlers, a long snout, a white hairy belly, brown fur covering our entire bodies, giant long forelegs, and hooves. Ravensborg reportedly called the police department that evening around 10:30 saying that he had hit a deer and he was uninjured. He also said that he used the flashlight on his phone to investigate the damage and said that he couldn't find the body of the deer around his car and said that it ran off into the woods probably. The Attorney General said that he had not been drinking at the Republican Party event and that he is cooperating with the authorities. Entirely possible, he could be innocent. Also possible, he was completely wasted, didn't realize he hit a man, and didn't want to stick around and have the police test his BAC. And yeah, also possible that he knew he hit a person, took off like a little instead of burying the body in the marsh like you're supposed to, and made up a bullshit story. Time will tell.
Astronomers think they may have discovered life on Mars. No, wait, Venus. Are you sure? Huh. Cool. Anyway, astronomers found signs of life on Venus. Telescopes in Hawaii and Chile cited phosphine, which is a noxious gas tied to life on Earth. The gas has two ways that it can be formed. The first was when it was used during World War I for chemical warfare purposes. The second is referred to as a waste product that resides at the bottom of ponds from rotting material or inside the intestines of some animals. So we're either going to find a bunch of World War I veterans on Venus or animal intestines. Not sure, not an astrologist. Some scientists considered that the gas could have come from volcanoes or major storms, but they concluded that that amount of phosphine would not occur from those events. Fun fact about Venus, it's 800 degrees Fahrenheit, has no water, and has been referred to as Earth's evil twin. Like my evil twin Dimitri. Anything that can survive on that is not something that I really want to go up against. So when it's time to pick a new planet, I'm heading to Mars. I feel like I can take Marvin the Martian. Scientists say it seems almost too good to be true. Russia, Japan, and Europe have already sent probes, while NASA is considering 2 Venus missions. One, planned for 2026, will take place right in the middle of President Trump's 3rd term. I kid! It's just a joke.
Hurricane Sally wreaked havoc in Florida and Alabama this week, delivering 4 months of rain in 2 days' time, destroying boats, homes, and literally anything that wasn't tied down. When the Floridians exclaimed, "Why?" when the storm hit, the storm replied, "That'll teach you to call me Sally." In other news, Hurricane Teddy is also on its way and has proclaimed that it finds its name unbearable.
Mayor Warren of Rochester, New York, fired Police Commissioner Singletary a week after he resigned over Daniel Prude's death. Prude, who encountered the Rochester police naked while on PCP, was held down by the police officers while wearing a spit hood. The medical examiner concluded that Prude died from homicide by asphyxiation, with PCP being a major contributing factor. The outrage here is less about the officers' initial conduct of the event, as they did not seem mean-spirited, and at the beginning, everything was going reasonably well. Then an officer pinned Prude down to the ground when he started resisting, holding himself in a plank position with essentially all of his body weight coming down on Prude's neck and back. That showed a grotesque lack of training or sense. Probably worse, though, was the total lack of empathy once Prude expired. When Prude coded, there was no rush to give him aid. One officer kind of ambled off into the distance to try to find the handcuff keys, and another officer complained that his gloves were ruined. We understand gallows humor, but this wasn't the time or place. Those catastrophic events were followed by a perceived cover-up, with the video downplayed to the mayor and several reports changed that would actually make this event seem to have a very different sequence of events than actually occurred. It is unclear at this time whether Singletary was a party to any of this stuff or if he's just a scapegoat for the mayor. This one just sucks all the way around.
Wildfires continue on the West Coast. A report says that a storm hitting should clear up the quality of the air, but could also present problems in spreading the fire. So far, over 5 million acres have been burned across 3 states, and 30+ people have been killed. Firefighters and officials have said they are also battling misinformation. With the wildfires have come widespread rumors of arson. The FBI and local authorities so far have dispelled all rumors about arson, saying there has been no evidence saying that the fires were intentionally started. In unrelated news, a California couple would like to announce the names of their soon-to-be-born twins, Ash and Blaze.
In a recent Joe Rogan Experience podcast with Ranger Up co-owner Tim Kennedy, the idea came up for Joe Rogan to moderate a debate between President Trump and Vice President Biden over a 4-hour period. Joe would moderate a discussion-style debate with no audience other than the live audience online. The debate would be held in the intimate setting of the tanning bed that now hosts all of his podcasts. Listeners immediately loved the idea, and Tim tweeted about it. And that tweet was answered quickly by none other than President Trump. Is it going to happen? Only time will tell. But I've got to tell you, the idea of a 4-hour conversation with a guy like Joe Rogan, who, whatever you think of him, tries his best to have really in-depth conversations with people, would probably be a lot better than what we've seen from political debates over the last, 20 years. I'm all for a face-to-face debate without biased moderators in the toaster oven that is the Joe Rogan Experience.
Iranian authorities executed world champion wrestler Naveed Afkari after he was charged with the murder of a security guard during the 2018 political protests. No actual evidence was presented, and it's reported that the prosecution used hours-old security footage to try and link and justify the charges. It is also reported that he may have signed a confession while being tortured. Naveed was sentenced and hastily executed without being able to see his family members for one last time, which is Iranian law. There has been a global outcry at the execution, which is seen as a gross violation of human rights simply because Naveed chose to protest the government. Many people and organizations reached out on behalf of the world champion wrestler, including President Trump, who asked Iran to show mercy. Naveed's brothers were sentenced and also charged to a 1.25 century long prison sentence. Currently, the International Olympic Committee is deciding whether or not to ban Iran from future Olympic Games. Naveed Afkari was 27 years old.
This week, the city of Louisville awarded Breonna Taylor's family $12 million. Taylor has been a pillar of the Black Lives Matter movement since she was killed by police in March in a no-knock raid. Police executed the raid at the home of Breonna Taylor and Kenneth Walker. Walker was a legally licensed gun owner and, believing that the police were burglars, engaged with them as they came through the door while calling 911. Reports state that during this exchange, Breonna Taylor was shot 8 times. The officers were said to have been executing a warrant for a drug dealer that actually didn't even live in that complex. They have been charged with battery, wrongful death, excessive force, and gross negligence. Taylor's family attorneys stated that they still have a long way to go. The family is still seeking police reform and charges to be brought against all officers involved. The recent settlement included a provision that all search warrants had to be approved by a senior officer. It also included housing credits for officers that were willing to move to low-income areas that they patrolled. The Louisville City Council has since moved to ban no-knock warrants in the city, and Congress is working on similar legislation across the country.
The review site Yelp released its latest economic impact report, revealing that business closures are increasing. As of August 31st, over 163,000 businesses have indicated to Yelp that they are closing for good. This is up 23% since July. We have talked about this dire circumstance since the beginning of the pandemic, and we're now seeing accelerated closures. We personally know businesses in Raleigh and Durham that are struggling even now, even though the state isn't shut down. People aren't living their lives outside of their homes, and all of their spending is going to a few retail giants and not a lot of local businesses. So as we said from the beginning, get out there and spend your dollars with the local and small business community.
There have been several reports of orcas striking sailboats in the Straits of Gibraltar over the past month. These incidents have been occurring with increased frequency, and scientists are baffled. The victims and witnesses all describe these attacks as coordinated. As a nature expert myself, and a person that watches a lot of Discovery Channel shows, I can tell you for certain these are planned attacks. Orcas hunt in pods, not unlike tide. They use strategic positioning and coordinated movements to hunt their prey. I watched a show once about how a group of orcas rush a tiny seal sitting on an iceberg, and they flood it, and then the seal falls in the water, and then they fucking eat it. I've also seen shark weed. Apparently orcas have a penchant for great white liver, which they surgically remove while gently rubbing the great white's nose, and then leave the carcass for dead. Furthermore, I know that several orcas have seen the Blackfish documentary and are super pissed. Get a bigger boat, people. And also, they're not called friendly whales, they're called killer whales. Don't trust them.
In a not funny at all Florida story, a Florida man named Robert Dubois was cleared from murder and rape after 37 years of incarceration. Turns out the DNA evidence irrefutably says that Robert Dubois didn't do it. Turns out the bite marks on the victim didn't match. And the only corroborating evidence was a jailhouse informant who got reduced time for turning him in. For f***'s sake, people. This guy should get to commit 37 years of misdemeanors without any penalty. He should be able to steal shit, start fights, start a tiger sanctuary with drug-riddled love slaves, whatever. We owe this guy.
And finally, in Florida Man news, police were called by a woman who was living with a 64-year-old woman named Lovely Butts, who allegedly poured bleach all over her. After pouring bleach on her, Lovely Butts apparently tried to beat her with a handgun, which goes to show she probably doesn't understand how handguns work. Alternatively, ammo is very expensive right now. It's unclear what the woman's relationship with Lovely Butts was, so we'll just say roommate. Apparently, Butts became angry when an argument heated up over the whereabouts of Butts' medication. Butts allegedly bared her teeth and poured bleach over the young woman's head. Butts' bleach went into the girl's eyes and mouth and allegedly almost caused her to lose consciousness. The girl ran into the house and called the police, locking herself in her room to keep Lovely Butts out. Lovely Butts shook with rage and threatened to hit the girl with a gun. When police arrived, they found the Butts gun and placed Butts into custody. The Butts gun, however, was empty. The report says that Butts was arrested on the charge of child abuse without great harm and assault with a deadly weapon without the intent to kill. When asked what they thought about Lovely Butts, the police simply said they thought the whole thing was asinine. No ifs, ands, or buts. And with that, I'm Nick Palmisano.
And I'm Matt Finney.
And this is the Bad News Network. Our news is at least as bad as the news you're getting already, and as always, you can get 25% off at rangerup.com when you use code BNN. And, you know, Matt and I have an OnlyFans. Nick and Matt. Isn't that what you do to get fans? Am I wrong? Have a great weekend. They have publicly asked the French and German for the lab results. You fucking laughing your ass off over there. Do I need to just stop?
No, you can't stop in the middle of it. You gotta keep going.
I can just restart.
No, you gotta keep going.
The Kremlin has publicly asked the French and Germans the Kremlin has